Welcome to Kingsmen Software's Beyond the Build podcast. At Kingsmen, we pride ourselves on building enterprise-quality software, and we have the privilege of meeting some pretty interesting people along the way. Come join us to meet the visionaries, the disruptors, the entrepreneurs, and the innovators that envision new technology solutions and then bring them to life. Come join us to hear what happens beyond the build. Welcome to Kingsmen Software Beyond the Build podcast. I'm Kevin Carney, one of the managing partners here at Kingsmen Software, and we are in the Kingsmen Bourbon studio at beautiful Camp North End. With us today, we have Bill Clarisi, our intrepid CEO and sound and video engineer today. Welcome, Bill.
Welcome, Kevin.
So you had some issues earlier this week with a power outage, didn't you?
Yes, we got through it. We got through it though.
Did you have to bury that switch in the backyard?
Yeah, we're going back to analog. Everything's analog now.
Okay.
No more digital.
You're back up and running though?
Yes.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Also joining us is Rashmili Vemulov, our head of marketing. Welcome.
Thanks.
Oh, you don't have a mic. just say loud. Yeah. And you've been gallivanting around Europe for the past couple of weeks, haven't you?
Yeah, just a week and a half.
Week and a half? You've recovered?
I'm recovered.
Yeah, a late honeymoon?
Yes.
Good for you. All right. Well, joining us today, we have from Vectari, Alexandria Villarreal. O'Rourke, did I get that right?
Yep.
Okay. And Chris Hart, both co-founders and co-CEOs of Vectari, right?
That's right.
Okay. So Chris, I've known you for a couple of years now, right? You were with Level, kind of friendly competitors in the Charlotte tech market. And Alex, I've seen you in, I can't count how many events I've seen you at in Charlotte throughout the years. But most recently, you guys started Vectari, and I saw you at the Finsiders Award. You guys are up for an award there, right?
Yeah.
The Risk Takers Award?
That is one of the names of it, yes.
Okay.
It's the name we like better.
You like better? Okay. What was it? What else is it called?
They have, I think it's a slash. It's like fail fast / risk takers. And it's like, I think risk taking is probably better than failing fast.
Yeah. I'm not sure failing fast. I mean, yes, it's a good thing to do, but I'm not sure there's an award I want to win.
Well, you don't have to worry because we did not win it, thankfully.
Okay. Well, yeah, we were up for an award too. We didn't win either. But when Chris, you and I were on a panel conversation here at Kingsmen Software, Pay CLT, about AI in the payment space. And then, Alex, you just presented at See the South last week, right?
That's right.
So you guys are everywhere. So we had to have you in the podcast. So give us a little bit of background about Vectari. Give us some of the stats. When you started, how many people you have, how you're doing in your product development, awards you've won, things along those lines.
Sure. I'll start. So we're coming up actually on the year mark. I was just noticing this the other day. It feels like, I don't know, for I think most people who have started companies before, you're in the situation where you feel like it's either taken forever or it was yesterday, but there's no middle ground. So
or both at the same time.
Yeah, it does not feel like a year to me. It feels like either yesterday or like a decade, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. It's like kids, right? The days are long, but the years are short.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we literally started the company at the end of May last year. And
so you're just at a year.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's literally like, we're recording this on May 20th. It's I think May 29th or May 30th was our incorporation day.
All right, we need a cake.
That sounds great. We'll come back in a week. So we started a year ago, and as you kind of mentioned, Alex and I both have been involved in a lot of different activities and efforts around fintech in the Charlotte community for years now. And Alex and I got to know each other actually because of one of those back in the Carolina FinTech Hub early days.
Oh, sure. With Tark.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we were both working on the Carolina FinTech Hub early on in that. So that was really what was the genesis of us meeting and really starting to talk about the opportunity that exists within financial services and financial institutions in general looking to adopt AI. We were talking about this literally back in March, April of last year, and that was really what got us started. So that was when we started, and today we are sitting at 5 full-time employees. We've got a couple full-time contractors and a host of experts that we call on a consultative basis, and still very much in the early days of working through pilots and proofs of concept. But that's kind of the beginnings of the origin story.
Yeah. And I will say, so when Chris first sold Level, 2 years ago? 2.5.
Geez, the time also dilates after the sale of a company. So we announced the sale at the beginning of April of 2021.
And we had coffee right after, and I said, whatever you're doing next, you're doing with me. So you don't have to tell me what it is, but we're doing it together. So
you've been buds for a while.
Chris and I have just always had very like-minded ways of approaching the world. And, they say, one of the most important relationships you're going to have is with your co-founder, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's been perfect. I've been, I started my career as a regulatory lawyer. I started at the CFPB. I left there in 2017. And
can you spell it out for
the
everyone?
Consumer Financial Protection Bureau?
Yep.
Everybody's favorite. I was a lawyer there, so I worked on everything from enforcement and supervision to collaborations with fintech companies. And so one of the things we're working on is, can you use AI? How can you use AI to responsibly, make consumer financial services better? So more access, more accuracy, whatever it is.
And that was a while back, right?
It was. I mean, this was, we worked on the first no action letter for an AI company in 2016. I think it was published in 2018. But yeah, so we were doing AI before it was cool. But I've been doing it since, right? So one of my areas of expertise became the responsible use of AI, model management, risk reviews, all those things. But always with an eye towards not, we would always say not trying to have it be a hammer looking for a nail, but really starting from the problem and seeing whether AI could help. Mm-hmm. And so, I did a little bit of the work at the law firm. I advised a bunch of AI companies. And then at Bank of America, obviously, Erica was my client. She's an excellent client. Never complains, always explains.
You have to explain that as well to everyone. Make sure they know who Erica is.
So Erica is Bank of America's AI-powered chatbot, and she is a dear friend and colleague.
So you had to make sure that everything that Erica said was legit, like it followed all the compliance rules.
Right. Okay. So basically making sure that as we developed her, we had an eye out for anything that could go wrong and prevented it. Mm-hmm. And then I went to be the general counsel at a tech company called Valen. It's a mortgage servicing company in New York, and I started, I guess, a year before I left. But kind of towards the end of it is when Gen AI came out. And I'd been doing AI forever, and I was so excited. And the very first thing, it had just come out. It had just been in the New York Times, I think, the week before. And I had just paid $70,000 for a compliance review of something. And without using any client data, I replicated the review on ChatGPT, the old one. ChatGPT 2 or whatever it was, 3.
Yeah.
And it was perfect. It was literally super accurate, like down to the point. And I had just paid so much money. And I thought, okay, there's something here. Mm-hmm. My CEO at the time was very tech forward, as you can imagine. It's a startup. And so we started thinking through, because I kind of knew where all the bodies were buried in terms of risk. I knew what regulators were worried about, how to prevent it, how to build a model that they would be happy with. We were pretty confident using it early. We were one of the early commercial contracts for OpenAI. That was a fun experience. And really from there, it's sort of my calling, right? I've been doing this forever. I'd always wanted to do more of it. And as soon as I started seeing how we're basically going from horse and carrots to Tesla, that kind of level of jump. In both the accuracy, the speed, and just the ability to analyze text, which for compliance, a lot of what you're doing is analyzing text. And so that's around the time Chris and I started talking. I did give my company the right of first refusal. I said, how about we turn it into an AI company? And they said, okay, we can do mortgage AI. And I was like, okay. So that's when Chris and I started thinking through some of the issues. And, our goal basically is to take a lot of the work that we've done in the past, such as the compliance reviews and enforcement defense and all those things, and do the things that were really manual and where we're, I was hiring 30 consultants at a time to go look through, complaints at the request of a regulator, doing all those things that were really manual and really inefficient, and training an AI model to do it with the training of an expert, right? Because I think an AI model basically can replicate the expertise of an individual, but it's only as strong as the individual, right? Mm-hmm. So everybody we work with to train the models has been a chief compliance officer, head of risk, at this financial institutions. We're getting a lot of, friends of the company that are kind of late career compliance and risk executives who are really excited about AI, but don't quite want to launch a startup. And they've been just incredibly helpful because it's basically like being able to replicate the brain of a chief compliance officer for a bank and just create 1,000 of him and just,
right.
set them loose on your complaints. It's magical. So it's been a really exciting path. The other thing that I'm really proud of that's sort of core to what we're doing is everything we do is in Spanish and English. I'm a native Spanish speaker, hence the speed of my speech. And that was something that's throughout my career been an issue, right? So the CFPB, there I worked on how to get Spanish speakers to have better consumer education and better be able to file complaints. To date, the CFPB takes complaints online for English speakers, but if you're a Spanish speaker, you have to call in. Even though Spanish speakers are a giant number of the complaints. At the bank, I also worked on, making Spanish services more accessible. And so it was very important to me that anything we did had that angle. And so one of the very first things we did is we built a regulator quality AI translation model focused on financial services. So we taught the model to speak the way the CFPB speaks Spanish, down to, turns of phrase, but specifically the vocabulary that they want banks to use.
Like the financial services vocabulary?
Exactly, right? Okay. So how do you translate interest rate? How do you translate, whatever it is?
Amortization schedule.
Exactly.
Right.
And we did, we reviewed thousands and thousands of translations. I reviewed thousands of translations. And what was funny is there were some errors. There were some errors even in their published content because, Spanish translation is hard. It's sort of an art. And so being able to train the model to replicate that art has been really incredible. I mean, the Spanish that it translates is better than anything any lawyer that I've ever met could do. It's very clear, it's very accurate, it's very conversational, but it's also just right. It's exactly kind of how you would say it. And so that was, I think, the very first thing we kind of launched with. Did we talk about David?
Not yet.
Okay. Well,
we're just talking about the three products that you guys have listed on your website. So you had mentioned the translation service,
right? And that's Transforma. That's the model that I was just talking about.
Yep.
And then kind of our bread and butter, it's just become, because of some things going on in the market, that's become our biggest kind of source of interest is a complaints analysis platform. So it's mostly used for oversight. So it allows you to look through all your complaints for hidden trends and issues that might look like nothing, but turn out to be vendor error, bugs, whatever it is. That's a lot of the work I did for all of my clients as a lawyer. Enforcement was always not something that the bank or whoever it was did on purpose. It was always something they hadn't caught in time, right? Where they were saying like, oh, we thought because consumers were confused, but actually it was a bug. And so we have trained the model to categorize and identify complaints that are reflecting a pattern that indicates a bug or another gap. We've been very successful in identifying some hidden issues for our clients. And obviously the idea is you identify the hidden issue, you correct it, and then you prevent it from happening again. And so then you're sort of saving yourself the risk of enforcement and the money that it costs to resolve it on the back end.
Does that product have a specific name or?
We call it Vectari Insights, TBD. I don't know what personalized name. And so that's been, I think, what's been fun about that product is everybody that we've used it with, that we've done a proof of concept or pilot, has a lot of ideas for what else we could do with it, right? We could do fraud claims, we could do vendor management. They're sort of, it's been really fun to see our clients kind of fall in love with something and then say, well, we could also it's fun when they start to think of it as like their project that they could also work on. Yes. So that's, I think, where we would probably are focusing most of our time.
We've definitely gotten the most kind of market signal around the policy insights or the complaint insights specifically.
Right.
Okay. So we've got some great background here. We've got, what I mean by that is like your personal journey. You're an attorney, Alex, and you've got a lot of banking and financial services and a regulatory background. Chris, you're also in financial services, heavy payments and consumer, and you've got the technology background. But it sounds like you had a missing a gap there, right? You had to bring in another person to help you out?
Yeah, there was the third leg of the stool is a guy named David Durr. And so David's background, he also started in financial services. So computer scientist by training, and started at the Federal Reserve Bank in Richmond, and eventually ended up starting a company called Notch. And Notch was an AI and ML consulting firm based in Richmond before AI and ML was super cool like it is now. But they were doing super cool stuff back then. And that led to Capital One actually acquiring them back in 2018. And so as a lot of people know, Capital One made significant investments in AI. And one of those investments was the acquisition of Notch. And it became a big part of their Center for Machine Learning. And so David went on to be a director in that team and, was at Capital One when a lot of really exciting stuff was being built. After Capital One, he went on to run AI teams at Meta and at Spring Oaks Capital, a fintech company, and ultimately decided to join us. I had the good fortune of getting introduced to David through a network that existed because of Level. So both some folks that we had on the Level team that had worked with David before, and also one of Level's investors who had also been involved with David in some of his earlier companies, put us together. And actually, I met David at pretty much the beginning of the pandemic time. And there just wasn't quite the right thing for us to work on together in Q1 of 2020 because the world was on fire. But he was one of those people that was just like, oh my gosh, I'm going to keep in touch with this guy forever. And, literally over the course of a couple of years, every once in a while we, touch base or end up talking about something. And then when Alex and I started talking about all of these opportunities that existed in financial services, David and I were chatting too. And it was the perfect complement to what Alex and I could bring to the table. So it's been great to have him be part of the company.
Yeah, it's a great way to hear the band got together. You also have some funding too, right? It sounds like you got funding very early on before you potentially before you quit your day job, right?
Yeah. So we raised in September, October of last year. And, by that point, we were still, I think we had the beginning kind of inclination around what we wanted to focus on, clearly, because we had to talk to prospective investors about it. But we knew that there was, selling to financial services regulated industry, just big or even medium-sized banks is a long and complicated process.
We get it.
Yeah. So, there's a certain amount of, chicken or egg kind of, thought process that goes into like, well, where do you start and how do you feel out the market? And, anything that you sell has to be developed to a certain point before you can even have any chance at all of being able to monetize it. But yeah, as a result, we did go out to raise money and, was very fortunate that we had a network of folks in large part from the X-Level days who were big believers in what we brought to the table and the opportunity that we saw in the market. So yeah, we raised about 1.7 million back in October of last year.
Well, that's a large amount of money for, what did you have at that point? Like in articles of incorporation? Like you didn't have a product at that point in time, right? Just a vision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We obviously had the company formed by then. We had the beginnings of a team put together.
Sure.
We were actively building things and doing R&D work. We were in early conversations with both an early large bank design partner and some folks who would ultimately become an early pilot customer or early proof of concept. But yeah, it was super early days. And I think it's the good fortune of having people who believe in you and also having been through it once before with the Level experience. Right. I think that certainly made it a lot easier. I would not have wanted to do what we were doing from a raising perspective as brand new entrepreneurs. I think that would have been way more challenging. Right.
Yeah. So you guys come from a great background. You've had a couple of exits to as a track record. You're not 25-year-old kids. I think you know something about regulations or anything like that. Yeah. You wear it well. Okay. So let me jump into a sidebar here. Some you guys are clearly you guys are experts on complaints. So I have a couple complaint statistics that let's see how well you guys know inside financial services and outside. So, all right. So let's figure this out. According to the Consumer Federation of America, I'm guessing that's a legit organization. It looked like a legit website. So
is it an AI created website?
No, it's not. At least that I saw. What are the top 10 consumer complaints? Now this goes beyond, like these are industries beyond just like financial services.
Oh boy.
So
I can tell you the number one complaint for financial services is credit reporting.
Well, that's question 2.
Okay.
We'll get there in a second. So what industry? Like,
what industry?
Yeah, what industry? I'll give you perspective. Like number 7 is healthcare.
Really?
Yeah.
What do people complain about?
Well, yeah, what would be the highest?
That's a good question.
It would actually make a lot of sense to you.
I mean, I assume financial services, but maybe not.
Where do you think if it's not number 1, where do you think financial services is? Oh, consumer debt and credit.
Consumer debt. I would say it's top 3.
You're right. It's top 3.
Is it 1?
No, it's 3.
Okay.
But what's number 1? You would know it. You do know it. Like intuitively, you know it.
Where do people? The DMV?
Yeah.
Really?
Auto sales.
No way.
Yeah, auto sales,
Okay.
repairs, right?
Okay,
right.
I can see that.
Yeah, yeah. Number 2 is home improvement. People come into your house and contractors and
Yeah.
that roofer that knocks on your door and says, "Hey, I happen to be driving by and I can help you fix your roof."
At See the South, one of the pictures said that it's something like 54% of all remodeling projects end up in a dispute.
Really?
So,
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Makes sense, right? Landlord is number 5. Landlord and tenant. Okay.
I wonder who people complain about. Like, or
Like,
who do they complain
I
to?
don't
If you
know.
have a problem with your landlord, anyway.
Small claims court?
Yeah. Better Business Bureau? I don't know.
The landlord?
Okay. Okay. Now let's go back into financial services, right? This is your bread and butter. So according to the CFPB, Consumer Financial Protection Board.
Bureau. Close enough.
Bureau. Sorry. Over the past 3 years, what are the percent complaint by type?
Oh boy. Okay.
You actually already knew this one though.
Credit
You already got it
reporting
right.
is
Yeah, credit reporting.
I want to say it's large. It's like 35%.
You know your
40%?
stats. It's 47.
Okay.
I think they changed the categorization because I noticed that like it went. There was credit reporting and then like credit services.
The
but one
taxonomy,
went down to 0, one went up to like,
the taxonomy changed.
They combined a couple. Yep.
Yeah. So 47%. The next highest is 1/10 at 4%. It's amazing. Debt collection?
Yeah.
I would have thought debt collection would be much higher.
You know what I think it is that the consumer group community has done a really good job of educating people on credit disputes. And there's, they have a form. Like if you walk into any consumer group, they'll help you file your dispute. So there's just there's more support around it.
Okay.
Yeah, people know about it. There's kind of an automated way to do it.
Oh, okay. So yeah, everything else here, like credit card or prepaid card, checking and savings, mortgage, money transfer, car loan, student loan. I would have thought car loan and student loan would have been higher up in the list. And then payday loans, the very bottom. Yeah, only 0.3%.
That's weird. I wonder whether, so, the CFPB's purview is large banks or another very large financial services company. I wonder whether they don't count complaints that are not within their purview.
Oh, I see.
And I think a lot of those complaints also end up with state regulators, in many cases, because that kind of debt is often regulated on a state-by-state basis, and the state regulators, most of them don't publicize the data the same way that the CFPB does. Okay. So there's a lot of like blind spots. If it's a type of complaint that doesn't end up with the CFPB, it's very hard to get public data on it.
This is where knowing the data is really helpful. This is why.
Well, the other thing that is interesting that gets masked in this categorization is that you don't know how much of that is actually about fees. So that this whole like matrix of what complaints are about, like there's a product level kind of analysis, which is what you're talking about. But then there's also like, what is the nature of the complaint within that category? Right. And so, 50% of the people across those categories could have been complaining about fees, but you wouldn't know it from the way that the data is categorized.
Right. Yeah.
And payments is like sort of topic wise, it cuts across all of them. It's one of the most common because, my payment didn't make it on time. You didn't mark it as paid, whatever it is.
Right.
Payments is a big one.
So they had 5 million complaints over the past 3 years. But I read a stat somewhere, true or not, I don't know, but it said something like, for every 25 complaints, only one is actually captured. So the depth is probably much bigger.
Yeah. Well, it's also worth noting that the complaints that are on the database that you're looking at are the complaints that end up with the CFPB, but not all complaints about banks obviously end up with the CFPB. So, there's the number of complaints that the banks receive on their own. Some of them end up with the Better Business Bureau or the FTC or somebody else. So the CFPB, again, is like this very rich set of data, but it's only one of them.
Right? Well, and all the written complaints are only in English. So I would love to see what all the Spanish complaints are about.
Okay, good.
Although I have some guesses.
All right, third one. We all know that pop culture notion that Karens complain a lot, right? But as reported by Forbes, there is a humorous study by a company named Bionic. And Karens are not the most prolific complainers. In fact, they only rank number 8. So what female name is the highest? Don't worry, we'll get to male names later. It's Bill.
Hey, careful. It's probably true, but...
So let's just list some women's names. Let's see where they're on the list.
Alex, she's a big complainer.
There's no Alex.
Oh, man.
There's no Alex.
I'm trying to think of like the demographic that would be most likely to complain.
Donna?
No, Donna. I have the top 20 here.
Linda?
Jane's number 3.
Oh.
Yeah, Jane. Why'd you come up with Jane?
So yeah,
you know a couple Janes.
Actually, I don't know any Janes. I don't think that have complained at all. But if you think about the demographics, right? So to Alex's point, you start thinking about, well, who are people who have enough financial products and have the types of relationships that would generate complaints? Okay, well, that's people who are probably born in 1990 or earlier. And then you start thinking about what are popular names.
Yeah, there's no Beatrice on here.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. So, like Jane's, Jennifer's, Linda's.
Stephanie?
There's no Jennifer, strangely enough.
Huh.
There's a Linda, number 17.
Okay, Linda.
Yeah.
Mary? There's got to be Mary. Come on.
There's a Marie.
Okay, I'll
and
take
a Maria.
I feel like
there's a Maria and a Maria. Yeah, you need to combine those, right? Yeah. All right. How about men?
John. John's a big complainer.
Nailed it.
Is it number 1?
Number 1 by double.
Do you know that there are more, in the Fortune 500 companies, more CEOs named John than women CEOs?
Really?
Yeah. At least as of 3 years ago, 4 years ago.
Piece of information.
Yeah, I think about it a lot.
There's no Chris on here. That's
surprising,
a good thing, right?
You're very easygoing, Chris.
Yeah. Is there a Bill? There is a Bill.
Of course there is.
But there's 15. William.
Oh, yeah.
15.
No,
Kevin?
in all different
There's
forms.
no Kevins on there.
I think that like Bob has to be up there, right? Bob or Robert.
Robert's number 6. We got Michael.
David.
David's number 2.
Yeah.
John and David. Yeah. you're like.
I think I cheated. I
looked at my notes at a time. Yeah.
I've just become the AI. I know everything.
So it's no longer Karen, right? The number 1 female is, according to Bionic, if you want to trust them, but Louise.
What? I don't even know
right?
what Louise is.
4.8% of the complaints were by Louise.
Interesting.
And number 2 was Anne. I wouldn't have put Anne. In fact, there's Anne with an E and Anne without an E. You add those together, like Marie and Maria. Yeah. Well,
maybe it's a pseudonym. Maybe it's what people say when they don't want to say their name.
Maybe. All right, let's get back into it then. So with your Vectari insights that you mentioned earlier, you had said, Alex, that you can go through all sorts of complaints at a much faster rate. And I read somewhere, it was a quote that you said, that it used to take you and 15 helpers 3 months to go, that you can do it down to a day and a half. So it sounds like efficiency is a huge play for this product. How does both customer satisfaction, like just in general, you want to do it better for your customer, you want to find out where the complaints are, and then also meeting your compliance goals, like how do those play into the efficiency, and how does that play, all those 3 of those play into your sales pitch to your.
So I think there's 2 main angles to it, right? So right now there's a huge emphasis on banks that are working with fintechs, right? So a lot of these fintech companies that you borrow from or deal with have a bank backer. That's, you don't really see them. They're sort of on the back office. There's a giant regulatory emphasis right now on the failure to monitor your fintech partner, right? So the bank owns that relationship. Regulators have said, you bank are on the hook. I don't care who your partner is. If they get a complaint, you get a complaint. Traditionally, that's not really been the model. It really has been, typically a little bit more hands off, where the fintech company handles their own complaints. And so there's a lot of emphasis on that. I read this morning that 35% of all the enforcement actions last year actually had that component of the oversight, the partner oversight. And so I think, showing that you're overseeing your complaints correctly, I think is a big one. The other kind of trend that's affecting this is both the CFPB and state regulators have taken the view that if you knew or should have known that something was broken, then you're on the hook. And you're on the hook as if you knew, right? You're on the hook kind of like a reckless disregard kind of flavor. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of emphasis now on what does it mean that you should have known.
Right.
And so a lot of banks will say, well, it looked like a customer error, right? And so, but now regulators themselves are starting to use technology, right? And so their view is if I can know, you must know, right? So if I have the tools that will tell me that you maybe applied the payment on the wrong date or whatever it is, then I'm going to assume that if I have the tools, you have the tools. And so there's a lot more emphasis on analytics and like really kind of deep diving into common consumer problems. One kind of advantage that we have is we see them across, right? So we're able to look at, bank A and say, banks B, C, and D had this issue. Do you have it? And I can tell you most of the time they do, right? Because a lot of banks use the same vendors. There's a lot of vendor issues. Vendors will always tell you that they're not the problem, right? They'll always blame the customer. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of pressure, upward pressure to be more accurate, catch things sooner, detection being a big one. And obviously cost, right? It's very costly to fix this complaint on the back end because you're giving refunds, you're, paying an analyst to go research it, and you're still, nobody, like the bank doesn't want complaints, the customer doesn't want to complain, like nobody wins when something gets broken. Mm. I think there's a misperception that banks are sort of trying to trick people into making a mistake so that they can get money. Like that's actually really costly. So it'd be a terrible business model. So I think there is an actual, downright savings in preventing a lot of these complaints and obviously the risk saving. But I think the other point of pressure is there's a lot of competition today between banks and fintechs. And fintech's whole vibe is like, we're friendlier and we're easier to use and we understand you better, whatever, right? And so there's a lot of emphasis on trying to keep up with that narrative and be able to sort of serve the customer where they are and really care about the customer and, use the tools available to them to have that relationship be better. So it's kind of a dual pressure between cost and risk on one hand and then competition on the other. And so for all there's really now, I think, the ability to prevent unnecessary breaks, gaps, vendor issues is kind of a business imperative across the board now.
Okay.
One of the benefits of solving these types of problems is that you can make the business case a bunch of different ways. So if you're an organization that's very compliance focused and you want to build a business case around reducing regulatory risk, great. Like we can help you reduce regulatory risk. But if you're an organization that's motivated by operational efficiency, okay, great. Like we can talk about how do receiving fewer complaints factor into the efficiency of your call center. Like the best way to reduce costs in a call center where you're taking complaints is to just get fewer complaints.
Right.
And if you're going to take the complaint, then resolve it faster. Like all those things, make a huge bottom line contribution. Or if you're just really motivated by customer experience, which you should be, we would like all of our customers to be motivated that way, then great. Like you don't have to make the business case based on operational efficiency or risk avoidance. You're just going to say, well, our customers are going to be happier and we'll measure that by NPS or whatever the way is that we measure it. But as a result, we can help our customers think about the problem through any one of those three lenses, depending on what their kind of orientation is.
Right. I know a lot of our big bank clients are very motivated by regulatory issues and compliance. So that would be the selling point there.
It is, but it's interesting because there's kind of like a tale of two cities in this. There's the banks that are very active in the embedded finance or banking as a service space, the kind of partner banks that Alex was mentioning. And because of the intense scrutiny that they've been getting recently, the FDIC has been going around. One of the other big regulators of that size of bank, handing out consent order after consent order, and all of them have to do with this regulatory oversight. So the banks that are in that category are very motivated by being able to be more tuned into how to handle these regulatory issues. And in some cases, the FDIC will literally tell them, like, go spend X amount of money or go hire Y amount of people to deal with this problem. But for other organizations, it's really hard to know how much risk you're reducing. How do you prove by spending, $500,000 on this, I avoided, $30 million in fines.
Right.
It's impossible to know. And that's what makes the business case tricky in some cases, is that, you can't really quantify that until until after the fact, which is too late.
Right. So a more kind of practical measure across the board is CSAT score, right? The customer satisfaction score. So if you fix a lot of the issues that are causing customers to complain, it would stand to reason that you would have, more satisfied customers. So that's one thing we look at. The other thing that's actually, for what we're doing, very relevant is first-time call resolution. And so it's extremely expensive to have a complaint that takes several calls, right? Because then you have your initial time spent, and then you have your research, and then they come back, and there's another, right? And there's more likelihood of a regulatory complaint when you don't have first-time call resolution. So first-time call resolution is one of our goals, is one of our kind of measures. But I think between the CSAT score and first-time call resolution, I think those are kind of two measures that kind of make the abstract more concrete, right? Like those are numbers you can look at, talk to the board about.
Show that it's working. Okay. So are your target clients banks, big banks, small banks, community banks, fintechs, all the above?
So all the above in the kind of macro sense, but the focus that we have right now is on what we consider to be the mid-market banks. So mid-market banks for us is really anybody $5 billion in assets and above is in the mid-market technically. So that's like the top 250 banks in the US by asset size. Where we see banks most interested in what we're doing are typically banks that are around 8 or 9 billion. They're getting up to the 10 billion mark, which is where things tend to change from a regulatory oversight perspective for banks.
The radar. Yeah.
Yeah. And then all the way up to, the kind of bigger mid-sized banks, which are, you think about like super regional banks that are in 4 or 5 states, and they're typically anywhere from 25 to 50 billion in assets. But there's also this other kind of non-bank financial institution that's off the radar for a lot of folks, but has this very same problem that we've been working on lately, which is in the mortgage asset owner space. So I don't know, Alex, if you want to talk a little bit about that.
And it's not just mortgage. So there's a lot of spaces where there's a lender. It's similar to like the bank fintech partnership, right? There's a lender who owns a loan, but they're not the ones you're actually going to deal with, right? So they generally have, in mortgage and auto and a bunch of other places, student loans, they'll have a sub-servicer. So the sub-servicer is who you think is your mortgage company, auto company, whatever it is. You have no idea who this
you get the statements
owner
from them, but
exactly.
Someone else owns your
and you
mortgage.
call them and whatever. Yeah. And so, but it's the same construct, right? So the asset owner, so whoever actually owns the loan, is on the hook for anything that happens to that loan. So if you have a sub-servicer who is, maybe has an error or a vendor issue, whatever, that they don't know about, and it's causing a lot of complaints, you're really supposed to be catching that and addressing it. And so there's a real kind of oversight duty. And so that's one of the things we're working on, is sort of making that process easier, not just detecting it, but okay, so you found it, now what? Right? Sort of really walking them through, here's how you run a risk issue, here's how you would interact with your sub-servicer on it. That's been, I think, a really underserved part of the market that's ripe for disruption. So that's where we are.
Okay. Getting to the AI models that you guys have, how did you train those? Did you train those on the CFPB data, or did you train it based on some client data? Where's your base? And as a kind of a side question, is that, do you customize that for each client, or is it broad based? Tell us about how it's built.
Yeah, it's a great question. So we do look at CFPB data, but we also look at proprietary internal customer data. One of the things that we touched on earlier when you were talking about the CFPB data is that really only a certain subset of complaints end up with the CFPB. And so for most organizations, they're sitting on a pile of complaints that they've taken from a variety of different channels, and the complexion of those complaints may be very different than what the CFPB data would represent. So the CFPB data is interesting and helpful, but it's not really the complete picture. So we do label and train, but on a combination of proprietary complaint data that we get from customers and also using public data. And we also do a variety of techniques to be able to get at not just what is the complaint about, but some of the other characteristics of the complaint. So some of this is like secret sauce, but to give you an example, one of the things that's really important to know at the end of a complaint is, or at the end of a record about a complaint is, was this resolved or not? And, that actually is kind of a hard thing to figure out, and not everybody has the same definition of whether it's resolved or
amicably.
The regulators
resolved,
do. I mean, there is a right answer, but not everybody necessarily uses the answer that the regulators would consider to be correct. So that's a part of what we've been doing to be able to analyze complaints. The other thing is that there is definitely the AI component of it that uses a combination of LLMs and other kind of generative AI techniques. There's other things that we do to process the data to be able to cleanse it and do other types of analysis on it. So some of it's generative AI, some of it's non-generative AI types of techniques. From a customer-specific perspective, one of the things that's been really interesting is that different organizations have different ways of thinking about complaints and categorizing them. So while on the one hand, we do have our own proprietary taxonomy of complaints in terms of like how would you categorize the complaint, oftentimes we'll talk to a bank that has their own categories and they want to continue using their own categories for lots of very legitimate reasons. And so part of what we have to do is figure out how do we map their complaints onto their product categories, even if we might have a different way of looking at it.
So is it also by product category, whether it's mortgage or auto loan or credit card? Or
Yep.
Okay. It basically depends on what the bank wants to do with it. Like who's going to deal with this? Is it going to be the mortgage team or the payments team? Right. So we sort of work with them on what's the outcome of what we give you, or who are you going to send it to?
Right.
But one of the things that's been really interesting about large language models in particular, so generative AI, is, as you know from your work here, generative AI, the beauty of it is that it's not word search, right? It's concept search. Yeah. So it really kind of understands what the complaint is about, not just what they're saying. And so we're finding that, surprisingly enough, there's a lot of complaints where the agent is telling the customer, oh yeah, this has been broken forever. Right. They're not saying it's a known issue.
Right.
They're saying like, oh, this has been a headache since I started working here in 2017. Right. Like sort of in many different ways. And like, that's a nightmare for a bank to have an agent say, this has been a problem since 2017.
Yeah. The agent has seen the pattern, but someone else hasn't. Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of the beauty of being able to use a sort of concept search, is that you don't need to know how somebody would say it. If you can explain the concept to the model, it will find all those little. So we have found a number of places where somebody will say, apparently agents complain about vendors all the time to customers, it turns out. And so, we've been able, they usually won't say the vendor name though. They'll say like, oh yeah, the company that does that work for us, blah, 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 blah. Right. So It's been fascinating to see, how much agents will tell a customer about internal issues. But being able to detect this is huge, right? Because then you're able to say like, oh, tell me more about this thing that's been broken since 2017.
The benefit of this generative AI and the idea that it understands the concepts is that a lot of this kind of complaint analysis work that's gone on using non-Gen AI techniques is very quantitative in nature. So banks may know that they get 100 complaints about a mortgage servicing issue or 50 complaints about a wire transfer issue. And that might be where the reporting stops. In a lot of cases, that is where it stops today. What hides in those numbers is, were those 50 wire complaints 50 complaints about the same thing that have been going on for the last 8 months? Or are they 50 new things? Is it 25 and 25? Like all of that richness that exists, it's in the complaint data. You're just not getting it today. And I think to Alex's point, the risk that organizations run is if you're sitting on a bunch of complaint data and that's 50 complaints about wires is the baseline. Like there's nothing wrong with that. Like maybe, but maybe not. Maybe, maybe there's an issue lurking in there that actually you should be aware of. But it's not going to stand out to you if you look at it through a purely quantitative lens of this many complaints in this category.
Right. Or rely upon the agent to tag those in the heat of battle correctly.
Right.
Totally.
Well, if you think about, a few years ago, we had the account opening scandal. Remember, all the banks got in trouble for essentially folks had perverse incentives to open fake accounts and then close them.
Employees of the bank.
Right. And so you can imagine, those are technically account opening complaints, right? So somebody called in and said, I didn't open an account, but it looks like, so they got grouped with in some cases got grouped with all the other account opening issues, right? I couldn't log into the website. It didn't recognize my password. I have an apostrophe in my last name in it, right? So that's all account opening. And so you just had a lot of account opening complaints. And so people would sort of think like, okay, well, we got to improve our account opening process because people really hate it.
Let's get better at creating fake accounts.
So it's frequently the alleged topic of the complaint will hide some meaning under it, right? And so the number of complaints that go into the customer error bucket is just giant, right? I mean, there's just a lot of places where the customer is saying like, no, I promise you that I put, the 17th of every month and it's going on the 18th. And the agent can only see that one instance, right? So to them, it looks like the customer put the 18, right? What are you going to do? But to us, we're able to see like really like every customer put it one day late. That's very unlikely, right? We always joke that it's sort of like you always know that person in college that like had, one crazy ex-girlfriend, like, okay, fine. But like if they had like 17, we have a common denominator problem.
Bill, was that you?
I have no recollection of that, Senator.
But I think that common denominator is where we shine, right? Where we're able to say like, it could be an error, it could be a mistake or, an accident, but it's just too common to be an accident.
When you're in the trench, it's hard to see the forest for the trees,
exactly.
Right? So I probably mixed my metaphors there. So it sounds like AI is a great use case for Gen AI. As Chris, you and I saw at the Pay CLT, right? The first thing people raise the question is, it's a bank. It's how can you use Gen AI, all the risks and whatnot. But it sounds like the regulators are hip to use this technology, right? Because it can improve customer satisfaction and customer protections. So are they? I know that regulators never say yes, you can do it, but they're good at saying no, you can't do it. Are they not saying no, you can't do it? Are they on board?
They're not. So actually, I think it was today, Congress came out with their list of priorities for AI. And one of their priorities is to ensure that companies are able to use AI to prevent problems. Like they're sort of going all in and saying like, ship has sailed them whether or not it's going to be used. It is going to be used. Right. And therefore, I did talk to, one regulator off the record. I won't say what country or what state or federal, who said basically there was a window in which a regulator could have come out and said, nope, you're not using it, until we know it's safe. And that window passed. And I think part of the reason it passed is because in that window, and that's sort of like 3 months right after you had all the articles about OpenAI, the White House actually worked with OpenAI and a bunch of the AI companies on these, AI Bill of Rights kind of. And I don't know this for a fact, but I sense that it would have been very awkward for the White House if a regulator came out right after that and said, no, you can't work with any of those companies that the White House literally just sat down with. And so I think that was a brilliant move on the part of the AI companies, but it also made it kind of an assumption that we were just all going to use it and just try to figure out how to use it. So I think where we are now is not, can you use it, but just how are you using it, right? And I think what we tell our clients is, AI can be a shield or a sword, right? And so a shield would be for like marketing or, loan underwriting, whatever it is. A sword would be, a shield is to protect your customers, right? So anytime you're using it for the benefit of the customer, I feel like, I know, having been on that side, that the regulator will work with you a lot more than if you're using it for your own financial benefit. Now, it's all financial benefit, really. But if you're using it in a way that's only going to benefit the customer, they will work with you to figure out how to do that right.
Right. Yeah, we did another podcast guest, I guess it was last month, that was using Gen AI for credit monitoring on the commercial side. So it's called Trace. And if you have a portfolio of commercial loans, the only monitoring you have is really the financials that someone sends at the end of the month or end of the quarter. And you still have to go process those and statement spread them. And then you realize that they're doing poorly. But if you track some of the social media or Yelp reviews or newspaper articles, you'll see some of those things come ahead of time. So it's an additive way to improve your risk management, and really consumer complaints is a risk management aspect. So this only seems positive.
Right.
Now, maybe people can bring up the data privacy. So that's my next question is data privacy. If I'm a middle market bank, and I want to take your base taxonomy of data, and I want to include my data on that. What are my options? That's the first. That's the second question people ask. Besides regulations, is data privacy. How do you handle that?
So there's two aspects to that are important. So one is that the PII that can exist in complaint data if it hasn't been redacted is usually not material or not important for the AI processing.
Yeah.
So, as an example, like if you look at unredacted complaint data, a lot of times what you'll find in it is you'll find account numbers, or you'll find names or addresses, or, whatever. And, whether an account is open at 123 Main Street or the loan number is, 1234567 is not really relevant to the pattern that we're looking for. And so either the bank can redact that data before we even get it, which is fine because we don't need it. Even if they do send it to us, we don't need it for doing the processing that we're doing. So we have our own redaction processes that go further than not just PII, but also looking at things like Alex was mentioning, the vendor names. A lot of times vendor names, even though the bank may not tell the customer, oh yeah, it's X vendor, like they'll write that in the complaint data.
Okay.
The fact that it's X vendor, we can, we have techniques for being able to remove the specific mention of that. We can always get back to it if we need to, but that can be removed from both the training data and from the inference data because it ends up not really being important.
Although we do tokenize it, right? So we'll know if it's the same customer. We won't know who it is because we don't need to, but we'll know that that customer had a auto loan issue and a mortgage issue, and because that's important. That's important to the
was
favor.
that Luis?
That was probably Luis or John. Probably more likely
Luis or John.
Yeah.
So that's one factor to it. The other factor is, when we talk to banks, if they have specific requirements around how to handle data, we're happy to look at ways to meet them where they need to be. So as an example, we were talking to a bank just in the last week or two that one of the things that they wanted to do is not just do all the PII scrubbing that we were mentioning, but also once the categorization was done, they wanted to be able to remove the data that went into that complaint so that it wasn't present anymore in the database. So, there are things like that we can do. The other thing, and, I think this is one of the elements of what we're doing that is very finely tuned to the needs of financial services is we have a very robust way of tracking what data goes into training, because this is part of what the regulators are expecting banks to be able to do. And so being able to say, literally down to like the row record level of training data, this is where the data came from. This was the legal foundation of why that data was able to be included in a training data set. And if at some point in the future that data can no longer be included, we know what training was performed with that data. We can remove it. We can retrain. So, being able to have that level of lineage through the data is super important.
And I think, that's part of our selling point is that, we're real adults. We've been doing this forever. We've been on the other side, right? So we'll never fight you on your NDA. We'll never try to use your data for anything fishy. The whole point is we've been you and we know what you're concerned about and what regulators are going to ask you about. And so we're just going to preempt all those questions, right? And I always tell clients, put me in front of a regulator. I love regulators, right? I'd love to tell them how the product works. So AI governance is actually a huge part of what we do. Testing, measurability, accuracy, all the things that you have to show a regulator are things that we care a lot about and that we pay a lot of attention to.
That's great.
We sound so fun, huh? Just real fun at parties.
How far along are you with building out the product in terms of R&D?
Yeah, so the translation product, we had that product built at the end of last year. We continue to improve it, but we did a proof of concept and early pilot with a customer. Literally, those translations are live on their website right now. Okay. And the complaint analysis tool we've done proofs of concept with, we're in active commercial discussions with customers right now. Again, continue to improve the product, but the kind of base foundation of being able to categorize complaints and do that work is working.
Okay. What else have we missed? What else do you want people to know? Or did we hit it all?
I think you covered it.
Yeah?
Yeah. You're just that good.
Very thorough. The complaint quiz was definitely, that was fun.
Yeah.
I guess the one thing I would say is that one thing that's become very clear throughout the projects we've done is that we have a lot of deep intellectual prowess in banking, folks who are really smart, who have really good ideas. And so what I love and what I hope, people will take away from this is that if you are at a bank and you think AI is really cool and you think there's a really cool way you could use it, I think there are companies like ours and probably yours, that can make that happen, right? And so I hope that folks who have an interest in AI and who think like, oh, maybe this is a cool idea, but like, I don't really know anything about AI. It's not rocket science. So if you think that AI might be a good use for something, like you should look into it because it really might be.
Right.
Our clients have been just such a source of ideas, feedback, like product development. There have been, I always joke that we should pay them because they're just so helpful to the build of the product. But I hope that AI will become kind of like a democratized, tool that everybody can use. And that's one of the things we focus on is we always say we're not aiming to replace your staff, we're aiming to elevate their work, right? And so make it so that they have time to look at the harder things. So I hope that we can all, as an industry, work together on making sure that people have that chance, to learn AI and to sort of elevate the quality of their work. Yeah,
we find a lot of our clients that they want to get into AI. The first thing they'll tell me is that, well, the executive suites have told me that, we can't do AI just yet. We're waiting for governance to figure it out. And my response is, you can't think about AI? Like, maybe you can't go deploy some AI, but you could think about it. And usually when they come in and we do like a brainstorming session, they have a few ideas and we map out their value chain. We find other areas where you could use AI. And it's just, the conversation just feeds off each other. And once you can do this, then you can do that, then you can do something else. And by the time you leave, you've got 10 different places you could use AI. And we give us some sort of rating score of like, well, this one's, probably easy to do, but a low ROI. This one is pretty harder to do. But the ROI could be huge, and risks and other dimensions. But then people come back with a plan. And so now when they do get the green light, they've got the plan they're ready to execute on. So hopefully your clients are the same way.
I hope they, I think this is common knowledge now, but if you're using one of like the top 15 tech companies, the big kind of Silicon Valley companies, you're using AI. Like, the ship has sailed, so
exactly.
It's kind of like cloud, right? Where a lot of the banks were saying, we're not going to use cloud. And we're like, we don't know how to tell you this, but like you are already.
Yeah. Every one of your vendors is using cloud, whether you know it or not.
Yeah. So we always encourage banks, like if you think that you're not using AI, it's only because your employees haven't told you. Like you're definitely using it. It's just a matter of, do you know how?
Right.
I think that the one other thing I would take away is that there's almost always a way to get started. There is a place that you can find that's safe and that will pass muster as long as you're thoughtful about it. And, maybe it's complaint analysis, but maybe it's not. Like whatever it is, I do think that this is one of those technologies where every day that you're not getting started, that you're not figuring out how to use it, is a day that one of your competitors is.
Yep.
And the sooner that you can get started, the better it is. There's not... you're not going to wake up tomorrow and have it be a better day to get started with AI. Today's the day.
Right. Even if you can just wrap your head around it, understand it, even if you're not like actively leveraging it in your company. But there are many ways to actively leverage in your company. Well, Alex, Chris, thanks for joining us. If people want to get to know more about Vectari, where are they going? To LinkedIn, Twitter, or X?
We can
be at some conferences.
So now, like Twitter and X, like it has two names always. You have to always sit with them. Yes. No, for us, the best place to learn more, you can go to our website. It's vectari.ai, vectari.ai. You can also go to LinkedIn. Feel free to look up Alex or me on LinkedIn. Connect with us. Happy to field questions. It doesn't have to be about complaint analysis either.
Is there a place where people can log complaints about Vectari? Right? Very meta.
We're really going to keep that one for a long-term project
for later on. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, Bill Rashmili. Thank you so much, Rashmili. Thank you for giving me the heads up.
And thanks for having us.
The wrap it up side. All right. Well, thank you for joining us for another episode of Kingsmen's Beyond the Build podcast, where we showcase interesting innovators from the Charlotte area. Until the next podcast, go build something awesome. Thanks to Bill Clarisi as our sound and video engineer. Thank you to Rashmili Vamula for our marketing support of the podcast on LinkedIn and other channels. And thanks to you. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Kingsman's Beyond the Build podcast, where we showcase interesting innovators from the Charlotte area. And until the next podcast, go build something awesome.